Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Your weekly movement news roundup.
You're with Give the People What They Want, brought to you from People's Dispatch. That's Zoe and Prashant. I'm Vijay from Globetrotter. This is episode 156, coming to you in January, January 2024. Extraordinary. Our first show in this new year. We're going to reflect a little bit on 2024 in a little bit. But for now, let's go straight into the main story, of course, which is the story of Israel's continued war on Gaza. Death tolls keep rising. The viciousness of the bombing in the northern half of Gaza is intensified. It looks very clear that Israel is not going to easily be able to complete its war aims, which seem to be, on the surface, the eradication of Hamas and perhaps the other Palestinian factions. But underneath that, language coming from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government suggesting a so-called Gaza Nakba. In fact, now stories coming out that the Israelis are in negotiations with the government of Rwanda to have Palestinians from Gaza essentially removed to Rwanda. This is very similar to what the British government of Rishi Sunak had proposed, which is to say, to have migrants who come across the into England be deported effectively without much consideration for human rights to Rwanda. Paul Kagame's government in Rwanda seems to have opened a shop to assist very brutal technologies of human management, let's call it. That's the kind of language they use. This is very chilling news if it is indeed confirmed later that the Israeli government is in talks with Rwanda to move Palestinians from Palestine into this country in the southern half of the African continent without, of course, their consent. I think that's the key issue. They will not be consenting to this. They will be moved pretty viciously. Unable to attain war aims in Gaza, looks like the momentum increasing in the region to make this a regional conflict. Three incidents took place, pretty stunning incidents. At the early part of the war, Hezbollah, the world's largest paramilitary organization based in Lebanon, released a photograph of Saeed Hassan Nasrallah, the Sheikh of Hezbollah, meeting with Saleh al Aruri from Hamas and a leader of the Islamic Jihad in Beirut. That photograph circulated pretty widely. Now, of course, with a drone strike, the Israelis have attacked inside Beirut, the southern part of Beirut, where they have assassinated Saleh al-Aruri, the Hamas leader who was the liaison to Hezbollah. This is, of course, a direct contravention of the integrity of Lebanon, which is not a party directly to the war happening in Gaza, although Lebanon and Israel don't have a peace agreement. They have had several clashes across the border in the last 4.5 weeks. Hezbollah and the Israeli military have been firing at each other. The Israeli military has used illegal white phosphorus to attack small villages on the Lebanese side of the border. That's clash number one. The tendency towards the escalation of the conflict is quite on the table now. Hassan Nasrallah gave a speech this week. He will give another speech. He has been extremely measured, reserved, saying that Hezbollah has the capacity to attack Israel at a full-scale level, but is not at this time willing to do so. Very interesting speeches by Mr. Nasrallah, quite different from his attitude during the war in 2006 and then in 2014, when Mr. Nasrallah was much more militant in his views. Now cautious, for good reason. They are not keen on a widening regional conflict at this time, as he says. Although the regional conflict has begun, Ansar Allah, a Ansar Allah, which in a way is a partner to some of these movements, Hamas and Hezbollah, has, of course, pinned down shipping in the Red Sea. So the conflict has already widened into the region. At this time, of course, suddenly there were two strikes. There was a strike in the town in Kerman in Iran, which houses the grave of Mr. Qasem Soleimani, the general assassinated by drone by the United States in Baghdad airport. That attack claimed 84 lives. Responsibility for the attack was taken by the Islamic State. A curious responsibility, seems more like that this is conducted by one of the cutout groups that has been operating on behalf of the United States within Iran. But at any rate, responsibility taken by ISIS for that attack. Iran furious about it, threatening retaliation, saying that they will do it at their own time, and so on. And then comes another attack. This is even more curious. A US drone strike on a leader of the popular mobilization units in Iraq. This strike took place in Baghdad, striking his car, killing him outright. In fact, this one got an immediate retaliation. There was no threat to retaliate. Immediately, popular mobilization units operating inside Syria attacked US bases at Rukban and at the Alomar oil fields, which the US holds. Immediate attack at these points, retaliation for the US strike. So it's not the case, despite what Saeed Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah has been saying, it's not the case that people are waiting to retaliate or that they are worried about the regionalization of this conflict. It has already become regional. It has already drawn in forces far afield from Gaza and would threaten to bring it further afield. Drawn in forces further afield, including, of course, South Africa, Malaysia, other countries, taking the case to the International Court of Justice. Prashant, tell us what's happening with that.
Right. So the hearings are probably scheduled for the 11th and 12th of January at the International Court of Justice. Now, the case made by South Africa is, I think, a case all of us should read. It's an 84-page document, a very, very powerful but also very succinct document that captures, the both the depth and the breadth of the horrors Israel has inflicted on the people of Gaza over the past 3 months or so, and I think also highlighting the fact that many countries in the world have actually made very similar claims. The basic claim in this complaint is that Israel has, by its acts of omission and commission, are with genocidal intent. Now, I think two or three things need to be sort of, stated very explicitly, and I think these are important things to note in this document. Point number one is, of course, the fact that a lot of the arguments made in this case, in this 84-page document, are statements by UN officials, statements by independent watchdogs, statements by various organizations, which for many, many months have really been warning about the genocidal nature of Israel's attacks in Palestinians, in some cases in so many words, and in some cases by actually describing the situation. We talked about many of these statements on the show before. For instance, the fact that aid agencies have been talking about how it's impossible for them to do their work. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres talking about life being hell. So many statements made by leaders of the United Nations, the body which is supposed at some level to sort of monitor and respond to this. So a very strong part of their case comes from these statements, and that itself goes to show just we've seen many of these statements, but the compilation, and which is why I think this 84-page document is a must read, because it actually brings together so many of these statements made over the months, not just by leaders of the UN, but by leaders of so many countries across the world. We have Brazil, we have Venezuela, you mentioned Malaysia, so many countries which have backed this case because their leaders at various points of time, their governments have actually recorded and registered this. So I think it's very important to note that. Point number two is the fact, I think, that it situates the genocidal nature of Israel's actions over the past 3 months in a long history of what Israel has been doing. In fact, the first section, many pages of this document are dedicated to chronicling what has been the impact of the previous wars. So, the case South Africa is making is that these are not acts in isolation. These are acts while these are the acts we are talking about right now. There is a long history of it, and this is in continuation of what Israel did in 2014, what Israel did in 2021, for instance. All these years, the kind of atrocities it inflicted, and these are pretty much a continuation of that, although the case specifically examines these incidents. And I think point number three, very important, is, it also, again, it's kind of astonishing to read because many of these statements are made once at a time, but it basically chronicles every major statement made by key Israeli leaders, key military figures, which express this genocidal intent. You talked about, of course, the discussions with Rwanda, Netanyahu statements, but leaders of Israel, military leaders of Israel, political leaders of Israel have been making these genocidal statements from day one. And it is essential to examine the sum total of all these statements to see that these are not stray comments being made to please certain vote banks or anything of that sort. This is the policy of that country. There's no doubt about that, because the continuum of those statements very clearly indicates that. So I think keeping these three things in mind, it's very important to sort of see some of the key aspects of it. The fact that it is not just the horrific death toll, of course, which is really on the minds. I mean, every day we have like about hundreds of people dying. The kind of so many of them children, a point which the South African case makes clear time and again. So many of the victims are children, but it's not just about the deaths. It's also about the way in which massive sections of the population are basically restricted to smaller and smaller parts of the territory. It is basically the denial of health infrastructure to even those who are wounded. It is the prevention of people from being born through basically attacks on health infrastructure. It is and also through the denial of basic necessities such as food. By basically Israel creates those conditions whereby basic necessities such as food are denied, hygiene is denied, which basically endangers the threat of even those who are yet to be born. So the case is a very comprehensive, description of all these aspects. There's also an attack on the cultural and the heritage of the people of Gaza itself, whether it be through places of worship, whether it be through libraries, universities, anything. Everything has been flattened. They make a point where that when you look at when you look at visuals from space, Gaza does not look the same anymore. That has been the extent of the bombing which the Israelis have conducted. So the question of genocidal acts is not just it's basically an all-out offensive on the people of Palestine itself, and that is the case South Africa is making at the International Court of Justice. Now, this is with regards to the Genocide Convention, which both Israel and South Africa are signatories to. Israel has, of course, announced that it will contest these, these facts that South Africa is presenting. Now, the important thing is that South Africa has asked for a provisional verdict, provisional steps which involve calling for an immediate halt to this assault. Now, question number one: if the ICJ issues such provisional orders, will Israel heed them? They have not heeded the Security Council. They have not heeded the General Assembly. They have not heeded the powerful opinion of leaders from across the world. They have not heeded the voices of millions of people on the streets. So what will come out of this ICJ process, very important to watch in the coming week.
Watch. We should also, of course, emphasize that some of this process starts when the United States governments put in place the Abraham Accords with Morocco, with Bahrain and others. And that was, of course, the brainchild of Donald Trump. Zoe, Donald Trump running in 2024 to come back to the presidency. He seems to be running into some problems. Today is January the 5th. There's an anniversary tomorrow. What's happening in the United States, and will President Trump be back in office?
Well, yes, we are one day away from what was the anniversary of what was a very, very crazy day, which was the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. And this was, I mean, for many reasons, I think we saw so many people across the world kind of paying attention to this crazy thing that happened, which was unprecedented in US history. It saw hundreds of people storming the Capitol building during the Electoral College certification process. I think many people were confused by what was happening because the US electoral system is so crazy. It's not done by direct vote. So, a lot of confusion about why even were the results not certified yet. What does this process even mean? But in any event, there was this riot in the Capitol building, really incited by Donald Trump and his administration, saying that the election had been stolen, saying that this was an illegal process, that he was the rightful winner, and that this counting process had to be reversed because there had been all of these irregularities. There were people who were killed through this in this riot because of the response, because of the violent incursion and the response of the authorities, who were extremely unprepared. There's a lot written about the collusion between different bodies of law enforcement and the Trump administration, kind of on purpose, not really fortifying security. There's a lot to say regarding that, but I think where it comes up today, several years later, is that currently, again, 2024 elections, we're seeing kind of Genocide Joe. He's going to face a Republican contender. Since the January 6th riots, there has been a lot of legal pressure against Donald Trump. It became very clear to the political establishment, to the ruling class, that Trump was a problem that they were unable to contain, at least for Democrats. I don't think they really anticipated the level of which this would escalate. And in some senses, they started to use different legal apparatuses at their disposal to try to kind of contain his rise. So, for example, Trump was banned from Twitter, which was one of the main social media platforms that he communicated to people through, and was constantly publishing about, the election steal, et cetera, et cetera. There was kind of this investigation into the January 6th events. There's been many different iterations of investigations. And currently in different states, he's facing cases by the legal authorities in those states, because again, elections are organized kind of on a state-by-state basis, to ban him from the ballot on the basis that he incited an insurrection, incited his uprising against the government, which subverted the democratic process in the U.S. This has taken place in Colorado and Maine, which have ruled that he cannot be on the ballot. Again, it's still undergoing a legal process, the appeals, et cetera. But it is certainly an interesting development. Given these are only 2 states, it's unlikely this will spread to all of the other states. And what other tools will liberals and maybe other sections of the ruling class use to try to ban him from the ballot? Because they really do see him as a credible threat to the democratic institutions in the United States. And all of their attempts to suppress him have been futile until now, and he continues to grow in popularity. So I think it's a crazy anniversary. Many of us remember those images of people storming in the QAnon shaman, which was again repeated on January 8th, which we're going to talk about a bit later. But this was a moment of maybe reckoning for the United States, where it hadn't taken seriously this right-wing threat, this radicalization of society and of sectors that really want to impose this anti-working class, anti-immigrant sort of policies in the country. So as we're coming up on the election year, these issues are coming to the fore once again, and on this anniversary of that date, a lot of these questions about how did it happen and how did these sectors become so radicalized remain. And I think that it will definitely come out in November.
You're listening to Give the People What They Want, brought to you from People's Dispatch. That's Zoe and Prashant. I'm Vijay from Globetrotter. Happy to be with you as ever. This is our 156th show. This is 2024. About 2 billion people, actually more than 2 billion people, roughly half the world's population, will vote this year in 70 different countries. There will be elections in 70 different countries. 8 of the 10 most populous countries in the world will go and have their ballots affirmed. That includes, of course, India, very large country, will be going into its election to elect a new prime minister, but we'll also have elections in Rwanda, in Russia, in Iran, in Bangladesh, on the 7th of January, Indonesia, South Africa, Mexico, and the list goes on. A very important year for democracy, although at the end of 2023, democracy had its own contradictions. You had in November an election in the Netherlands, which brought in the far right leader Geert Wilders. And then, of course, in Argentina, you had the election that brought in Mr. Javier Milei. Democracy has its own zigzags, as it were, and the likelihood in 2024 of this trend being reversed is not really there. We shall see what will happen in Rwanda, for instance. We already talked about how Rwanda and Chad have been approached by the Israeli government to take Palestinians. It's likely in Rwanda, Mr. Paul Kagame will be re-elected. It's also likely in South Africa that the African National Congress tripartite alliance with the trade unions and the Communist Party will win that election, squeaking through. This is not like the election 30 years ago when the tripartite alliance swept the election. South Africa having trouble with the ability to deliver basic needs to the people, including electricity, unpopular in some sections, but will likely win. Mexico, not clear whether the successor to Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, Claudia Sheinbaum, is going to walk in to the president's office. It's not clear. It's to be seen. In Bangladesh on January 7th, already real sense of unease about that election, the violence that it might provoke, not clear again. But this is where we are. We are in a world where democracy is riddled with contradictions. Let's go back to get a little report on Brazil, on its democratic shenanigans. January 8th, another anniversary.
Yeah, well, January 8th inspired in many senses by January 6th. Again, last year, days after Lula was inaugurated as president of Brazil, we had seen following the elections, leading up to the elections, the right wing in Brazil was really laying the groundwork for months and really even for years to what was the January 8th storming of the capital city, Brasilia. Thousands of people bust into that city, who went into the area of the three branches of government in the capital, stormed the legislators, stormed various different offices of the branches of power in Brazil, destroyed cultural patrimony of the country, destroyed these buildings, artwork, so many other things, once again, in similar fashion to Trump supporters, the Proud Boys, declaring that the election had been stolen, the electoral process is rigged, and that Jair Bolsonaro should be president. I think what's interesting about January 8th is that it holds a mirror up to the process of January 6th, and the way that it was handled, the way it was responded to, very, very different than January 6th. Similarly, again, it was definitely something that was in the making that people could have seen coming. Was there enough deterrence to this? Maybe not. However, the response was quite swift by Lula's week-old administration. Thousands of people were arrested then and there, detained on the day of the storming. There have been extensive investigations into the financing of these acts, into the role that Jair Bolsonaro played. He continues to face many legal processes in Brazil regarding his participation in this. He had actually fled to the United States, to Miami, the safe haven of all right-wingers in Latin America, and even some from other countries. They have now joined this tradition. But he went back to Brazil, where he's now facing again many charges. And essentially, it's interesting to look at how January 8th did happen, because it was a consolidated plan from the right wing since the 2018 elections, when Jair Bolsonaro even won the elections, to say that this electoral system, the way that it's going, the way that it's organized, is fraudulent. Even though I won these elections, I should have won by more. And so right then and there, Jair Bolsonaro begins to plant this seed, which over the course of those 4 years and then leading up to the elections in October 2022 is really amplified. I went to a lot of the Bolsonarista protests where you saw every single message was about how the electoral system was rigged and how there had to be intervention into the courts of the country, overturning all the institutions. And so beyond questioning the electoral system, it also kind of created this sense that the entire system of democracy itself in the country, and not even of democracy, but just the political establishment in Brazil is completely corrupt and will never actually serve the interests of the people. And it's a notion that's really divorced from any sort of reality. It's a notion that's divorced from the fact that the government continues to roll out very important social programs, that it has a very, very comprehensive intervention in daily life of Brazilians. It kind of just sows this discord within Brazilian society about whose voices matter. What does it mean to actually respond to the voices of people? This means just responding to the right. And I think that Lula has been able to counter this narrative, both through his swift punishment of these sectors of society that actually drove this insurrection, but also by really showing that his state intervention is having a material impact on the lives of people. People were at a very vulnerable state under Jair Bolsonaro, extreme economic insecurity, high levels of hunger, and homelessness. Of course, Lula in his 1 year in presidency has not been able to reverse all of these conditions, but he has showed that he can, with state intervention, respond better to people's needs. And so I think that this is showing an interesting way in how to respond to this narrative of trying to destroy the democratic institutions and this notion that we have to kind of upturn society at large. So, these two parallel events, very, very different responses, and we're at very different places where we are today. I think we lost Vijay Prashant, but do you want to close us out with a little update from the UK?
Right. Interesting that you ended with democratic processes and their impact. We are looking at the United Kingdom, where British junior medical doctors are on strike. The strike will last till the 9th. It's a 6-day strike at the beginning of the year. A strike that was not sudden, a strike they had warned about for a long time because of the basic fact that the government has refused to heed their very basic demands, which is the restoration of pay. Now, I think it's important to note that these junior doctors have seen their pay reduced by 26% since 2008. That is, in the past 15 years or so, their effective pay has kind of reduced by, the salary loss is about 26% because of various factors, including inflation. And basically, their pay has really not kept up with, the economy, with prices, for instance. And the doctors have been negotiating for a long time with the government. Last year, I think they were on strike, not continuously, but over various days for about 28 days or so. And this reflects a long-standing dissatisfaction amongst various sections of the National Health Service employees in the United Kingdom, whether it be nurses, whether it be senior doctors, whether it be junior doctors, all of whom are facing experiencing a huge amount of dissatisfaction with their jobs because of the continuous underfunding and under-resourcing of this very important health service. And I think there are two things to note over here. One is that on the one hand, this is causing a drain of health professionals who are going to other locations where they get better salaries. On the other hand, of course, in many cases, countries in the global north, especially in Europe, recruiting to somehow continue their health systems, recruiting professionals from the global south, people from Asia and Africa, and paying them lower salaries, and thus affecting the health conditions, health systems in those countries as well. So this is kind of causing some kind of a chain reaction, whereby the refusal of governments to provide even basic resources is causing, is having this impact across the world, which is why there's an important strike to sort of look at. The fact remains that the what do you call it, the junior doctors not at all happy about having to go to strike. In fact, they've talked about how reluctant they are to do so. They've asked that the government negotiate in good faith, but it does not look like the government is negotiating in any sort of good faith at all. And so, in this context, I think very important to kind of watch this strike, but also strikes by health professionals across the world. It's a topic we cover very regularly on People's Dispatch with our friends at the People's Health Dispatch, where we really kind of see how these strikes are actually interconnected. The struggles of health workers in the African continent, in South Asia, in Europe, in Latin America, many of them very closely connected for the struggle to build a better, more healthier world. And it is this struggle that the advocates of austerity, the advocates of, like for instance, Javier Milei, the kind of policies he's talking about, it is this struggle that they seek to sort of suppress by both repression and by underfunding, both of which go hand in hand. So very important struggles to watch out.
Thanks so much, Prashant, for that inspiring update as doctors continue to fight for quality healthcare. That's all we have for you today at Give the People What They Want. Remember, like the show, share it with a friend. Make sure to follow People's Dispatch on all social media platforms. Check out our website on a daily basis because we bring you cutting analysis on the latest global events and stories from movements across the globe. So make sure you're following that. We will be back next week, next Friday, with even more updates. Stay tuned.